The next theme that we're going to look at in the Truman Show is the impact of media and the media's manifestation in the film. So let's have a look at how it's affected Truman. And we see that, of course, that the television show is all-consuming in the world of the Truman Show. Yet it's at a time that social media doesn't exist. So the social media kind of component of it was encapsulated in television. And this is because the film was released 20 years ago, before the invention of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or even Snapchat. Yet the film eerily predicted the invasive nature of social media and how our lives can become distorted and literally filtered through Facebook, YouTube, and so on. And so we know that people filter their lives on Snapchat and Instagram. There's even Snapchat, you can get your runs and things. There's even a competitive nature to it, and so it's not a true depiction of somebody's life. It's curated, and in a way, Truman's life was curated as well, but not by him, because we see the scenes where Christoph is orchestrating what shots are included and orchestrating the events around Truman, even so much as when the twins push him against the poster so they can promote whatever it is on that poster that day. But despite predating social media, viewing the film from a 2020 perspective lends it even deeper layers of meaning. If one imagines Truman's Town of Sea Haven as an online space, we see the erosion of barriers between the public and the private self. So it's interesting to note that Truman unwillingly gave up his private life, and in 2020 we willingly give up our private lives. So here's a link as well for you to follow. But remember that Christoph ironically said that he jealously guarded, it was said of Christoph that he jealously guarded his privacy. But yet he didn't extend the same privilege to Truman. Truman had his privacy and his life constantly invaded. And so this idea of manipulation is because it's a performance. So is it real? And just like Truman, we cannot tell that Meryl is, just like Truman cannot tell that Meryl is simply playing a part of a loving wife, many people believe that the seemingly perfect lives of influencers on their Insta feed is entirely genuine. And of course we know it isn't. You can also look at people's images on social media or magazines or advertisements or film, that those images are curated as well. And we know not only do they have teams of people grooming them and makeup teams, but then post photography, that there's a lot of work that goes into photoshopping the images. So even if you think somebody's an authentic person, there's been layers of curating that have gone into the image as well. So it's not genuine. Social media allows individuals to curate the most attractive, appealing and enviable photos to post, while concealing the moments that might paint our lives in a negative light. And we all do that. We don't want to share the worst parts of our lives. In a way, the Truman Show unintentionally predicted how this notion of the private versus public self would become an extremely prominent theme in today's society, and it is. One interpretation of this theme is that the film argues that all of us lead fake lives, not unlike Truman's. The media, the government, and those in power control the information we receive, the laws that we obey, and the social norms that we have to abide by. There's nothing in our existence that can be considered pure, untouched, and genuinely authentic. The truth is simply unreachable, it's unachievable. Yet, it is this desire for something real that drives each of us and every one of us, Truman included. So the impact of the media is this idea of the curated life. But we have images here that you think this scene where Truman's writing on the mirror with soap, actually, I think it is. At first you think it's him being natural, and then when he finishes drawing his pictures, he winks at the camera and he says, "This one's for free." So the implication of that is that Truman knows that he's being observed and he's performing. I'm sure he doesn't realise that it's being sold on a TV show, but he certainly has a sense at this stage in the film that his private life is not private. And of course, after this, it's not long after this that he goes down to the basement where his true self is hidden. The next theme that we're going to look at is kind of connected. It's this idea of the simulated reality, honesty and fakery. So you can look at it different ways. How do we know what's real in our lives? And of course, Truman's quest, I suppose, is to break free of this. So, and this, of course, is a scene where the light falls from the sky. The light is actually a star from Truman's perspective, and it has the name Sirius. So Sirius as a star actually has a lot of meaning in terms, I think it's searching for truth or something like that. So this is one of the catalysts for realization of Truman. So he's had lots of people that have invaded his life before, but this is one. So as Truman getting into his car, studio light falls out of the sky, crashes onto his street. Truman picks up the light, turns and looks at the sky, empty. Later, Truman's sitting on the beach, remembering his father's death. A column of rain falls on him, only him. He gets up and the rain belatedly follows. It's quite a comic image when he's walking and the rain just follows him and then it all comes down. Another hint is when the car radio falters and Truman hears directions regarding his movement, which he recognises. And all the people around him seem to be choreographed around his life. The universe, the film set, is hinting to him that something isn't right. He's becoming slowly aware that the world he's living in isn't genuine. It's an imitation, a reproduction of life, and another way of describing that is calling it a simulacra. So is it an honest life? Is it a real life? And so the appearance of the real life of Sea Haven isn't the reality of it. It's just superficial. So that theme's also described as appearance versus reality. The next theme we're going to look at is that of religion, which is quite a powerful theme in the film. And that's because Christoph, the director, plays God. And these images here are him up in his control room that is set, ironically, in the moon. And it's in the day it's the sun. And so he's literally the man on the moon. So in this one he's peering down at Truman when Truman's nearing the edge of the ocean, or the edge of the world as we know it, as he knows it. And here is Christoph against the moon background. That's the fake surface of the control room. Now, one of the features of the postmodern era was the questioning of traditional values, such as the validity of religion. The Truman Show makes various not so subtle references to this questioning zeitgeist. So remember, the zeitgeist is the mood or the ghost or the spirit of the time. Christoph, whose name's quite literally made of the word Christ, controls the entire world that Truman knows. He's all-powerful, all-knowing. Fancy ways of saying that in Greek is omniscient and omnipotent. So omniscient is all-knowing, omnipotent is all-powerful. So he's all-powerful and all-knowing, being that he's aware of every actor's position at a given time, as well as Truman's greatest fears and dreams. And we know that Christoph's name is a pun of Christ. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the quotes that talk about this theme. So we have Christoph here in his control room. Then we have the moon here that's turned into a searchlight when they're looking for Truman. And we have here Truman's kind of risen from the dead. He was drowned in the ocean and now he's coming back to life here. And here are some quotes that look at this idea of religion in the Truman Show. So Marlon says, "Look at that sunset, Truman, it's perfect." Truman says, "Yeah, that's the big guy. Quite a paintbrush he's got." So where Truman thinks that Marlon's referring to God, he's actually referring to the big guy, the director, Christoph. In this one that relates to this scene, Christoph says, "We need more light. We'll never find him this way. What time is it?" Chloe, who's here, says it's way too early for that. Christoph says, "Cue the sun," which is an allusion to Genesis 1 in the Bible where God says, "Let there be light." Cue the sun, let there be light. Here's another one that relates to this scene. Truman shouts to the sky, "Is that the best you can do?" Christoph, in the moon room, whips around to face the screen. And Truman yells, "You're going to have to kill me." So he's aware that there's some kind of higher power at this stage. There's something that's playing games with him. He's not quite sure what it is. But Christoph sees it as directly relating to him. So is Christoph a good God? So there's one image in the control room. On the coffee table there's like a moon, like a snow globe. So here you have that sea haven there with the ocean around it, and it's under a glass dome. You can see the edge of it there. And it's a symbol to show that sea haven's under Christoph's direction. It's in the power of his hand. And you see here we've got a scene of him in the control room at one of the final scenes. And Christoph in this one is actually dressed like a priest or a minister. He's got this very plain black high neck collar. He's also wearing what all the trendy wannabe artists wear, which is black with a beret. Okay, let's have a look at what we've got written here. Christoph is a bad god. I think that's an interesting thing to say. Why is he a bad god? He uses fear to control his creation. Christoph imposes the fear of water on Truman in order to contain Truman's universe and keep him trapped. Truman, by going through the door into the nothingness at the end, faces down his creator, and he becomes a creature of free will and independence rather than the unknowing laboratory experiment he has been since birth. So it's quite a transformation. And remember that Christoph's, or the corporation of the Truman Show, bought Truman at birth. They named him, they owned him, and they saw him very much as a product, not a person, something that they could make money from and control and own. So Truman asserting his free will is actually a really big deal. It didn't go down too well with Christoph, as we know. Look also at what Weir is saying about the nature of God, or at least this God. It's not Truman who needs his creator. So Truman doesn't need Christoph. It's Christoph, the creator, who needs Truman, his creation. Without Truman, Christoph is nothing. And that's why when Truman's at the door at the cusp of leaving, Christoph effectively begs him. He tries to persuade him to stay. Yet when Truman's facing down the decision to stay with the life that Christoph has curated for him, or step out into the literal darkness and the uncertainty of the real world, Truman chooses the uncertainty, he's the protagonist, of the darkness beyond the door of the real world. Truman chose freedom of choice and uncertainty over the controlled lack of freedom in Christoph's controlled world of Sea Haven. That is, Truman chose to abandon the God that seemingly controlled every part of his life up to that point. There's a lot of visual motifs, particularly in that end chapter, or we could think of it as Act 5, when you come to the culmination of Truman leaving. So there's lots of visual motifs and biblical allusions. Let's have a look at them. The first I want to draw your attention to is the number 139 that's on the sail of the sailing ship. It's a reference to Psalm 139. And the following dialogue, the conversation between Truman the created and Christoph, it's not so much the creator but the God wannabe, echoes some of the dialogue of Psalm 139. One other biblical allusion is the low-angle shot of the sunlight seeping through the clouds, accompanied by Christoph's voice, which obviously has added reverb and echo, makes it seem as though Truman is talking to God. So that's not directly a biblical allusion, but it's kind of images of what we associate with the voice of God. Okay, this one here, after hitting the edge of the world represented by the painted sky of the set, Truman puts his hand on that painted wall, the edge of the world as he knew it. And it's an allusion to Michelangelo's painting of God reaching down to Adam, and that's in the Sistine Chapel. Here's a small bit of the original painting here, and here we've got Truman's hand reaching to God through the skies. Another part just after this, Truman walks along the edge of the water, so it's like one of those infinity edges of a pool, and there's a walkway around the edge of the ocean. Truman walks on that, and the camera moves back so you can see him from a little bit of a distance. It's a wide shot, and it's seemingly like he's walking on water. If that's not enough, Truman climbs a stairway to heaven, because it's painted with the clouds and the sky. He finds it's a door. It's a blackness to the other side. It's the end of this life he has known. He will enter it and cross over to the other side and live again. It's his kind of his resurrection. Truman chose to be free of the malevolent God of Sea Haven, but it's the opposite of heaven for Truman. So very different perspectives on that. And I'll just fix up the layout of that there. Okay, so let's keep going. So you can see that's quite strong images of religion, but there's more, if you don't believe me. So here's the sky that I talked about before. Here's some of the dialogue. Let's have a look at it. Truman steps to the doorway leading out of the set, but just as he's ready to exit, Christoph calls down from the clouds for the first time in the entire film. Just as a ray of sunshine, like Christoph calls down from the clouds for the first time through rays of sunshine like God to Jesus in Gethsemane. And Christoph says, "You can speak, I can hear you." And you can hear the reverb in that. Truman responds, "Who are you?" "I am the Creator." So that's a direct biblical allusion. Christoph calls himself the Creator. I mean, ego much? Truman listens calmly as his world comes crashing down around him, and he asks, "Was nothing real?" "You were real." He continues to Truman in a plea for him to stay. Christoph says, "Listen to me, Truman. There is no more truth out there than there is in the world I created for you again." So here we have this idea that it's the world he's created. Remember, he's just called himself a creator here. Now he's saying, it's the world I created for you. The same lies, the same deceit, but in my world, so it's Christoph's world, he owns it, he's the creator, you have nothing to fear. And all of this comes to a head. Truman realizes the extent to which his life is a lie, that there is no way to escape the lies and pain of the world. And Truman's posed with a question, a choice between two things: life, so freedom and choice, or not to live in the cage or the cave. Truman chose to exit the cave of his artificial world into the real world, not a shadowy imitation. And here we have the dialogue again. Christoph, who are you? Truman, who are you? Christoph, I am the creator of a television show that gives hope and joy and inspiration to millions. Then who am I? You're the star. And then Christoph arrogantly says, I know you better than you know yourself. And this is really important because we're talking about the theme of privacy. You never had a camera in my head, says Truman. And we know that he went down into his basement to go through the pictures, look at his reconstructed image of Sylvia, which was ironically hidden by behind the picture of Merrill, goes down into the basement where all of his mementos are. And that's symbolic of Truman going into his own thoughts. So when he goes into the basement of his own house, he's gone into the basement of his own thoughts. So unlike God, Christoph can't see into Truman's mind and his thoughts. So here we have the stairway into the clouds. Truman climbed the stairway through the clouds to heaven. The door symbolically represented choice. Okay, so Truman hasn't had a lot of choice. The choices he's chosen have been overridden, but now he's choosing to go outside. It was the first choice that Truman had experienced. He chose the blackness of the unknown of the other side that represents the unknown. Truman chose personal autonomy, so that's self-control, and freedom of choice. And sorry about that, apparently I can't type. Truman chose personal autonomy and freedom of choice by going through it. He therefore got to live a more authentic life, to cross over to the other side and live again. It is his resurrection, as alluded to by lifting his arms like Christ on the cross. It's a very, very obvious Christian allusion there. Okay, let's have a look at this next scene. The next theme, sorry. We're looking at Utopia and Dystopia now. So this is the idea of the idealized world. And of course it's the great American dream, and that's what Sea Haven represents, isn't it? So the great American dream, or the utopia of Christoph's created world, that refers to any idea that any person, regardless of their origins, can achieve any goal they aspire to, as long as they have a strong will and work ethic. So the American dream is pretty much like the Australian dream, that if you work hard enough, you can get whatever you want. But of course we know that's not the case, that a lot of it has to do with opportunity and, has daddy lent you $1 million, that kind of thing. And so this idea had been extremely popular in the 19th and early to mid-20th centuries, as many people truly believe that there were no structural factors such as race, socioeconomic class or religion that could stop people from reaching their dream, which was often centered around wealth. However, in the mid to late 20th century, which is when the Truman Show was released, the United States saw a change in thinking. People became extremely critical of the idealized ethos, arguing that the American dream was a lie. There are, in fact, many invisible barriers for minorities and oppressed groups who start out in life much further behind than privileged people, unable to ever catch up. And we know that that's actually very true, that if you have a child that starts kindergarten and they haven't been exposed to somebody reading books to them, they haven't counted pencils or whatever with their parents in the backyard, so they're already behind when they just hit kindergarten. And so this is what we call structural inequality. So people just thinking about that at that time. So it represents a character that embodies the new ethos of the era, postmodern pessimist view of the American dream. Truman rejects the old ways of thinking and looks to the future, and scary as unfamiliar as it might be. So when he rejected Christoph's curated world of Sea Haven, he rejected that idea of a utopia and having things being more important than having freedom. So quite deep ideas there. So in the film, we're introduced to Truman as a man who has essentially perfect yet modest life. Okay, a wonderful home, a beautiful wife, a stable job. But remember, he throws all this out. In other words, Truman has already achieved the American dream. He quite literally has the white picket fence that many Americans historically strived for, as this suburban lifestyle is reflective of the upper middle class. Remember that Weir insisted that all houses in Sea Haven or Burbank actually built a real white picket fence. And that's to reinforce this idealized idea. Despite this, Truman showed to be increasingly dissatisfied with his life thus far, which again reflects that 1990s zeitgeist. Remember, zeitgeist is the spirit or the mood of the time. Truman was constantly searching for something more, though he isn't sure what it is, but it's seen by his preoccupation with travel and Sylvia. So Sylvia may be who he really was longing for, or maybe he was longing for the ability to make his own choice. We don't know. But once he leaves, he and Sylvia will have to sort that out. Now, even at the time when Christoph warns Truman that there's no more truth out there than in the world I created for you, the protagonist chooses to go out into the unknown because the American dream is essentially a lie. Now, in Australia, we have our equivalent of the Australian dream, and that was a quarter-acre block with your own house on it. And of course, over time, that's become increasingly inaccessible. The proportion of your income needed for a home deposit, the proportion of your income to maintain housing payments has increased over time. So back in the day, people used to have 10 to 20% of their income to buy a house. Now it's closer to 50% plus. So it's very hard to live and buy a house. So the Australian dream of home ownership has also been shattered. But Truman, good old man that he is, cares little for his material possessions and his contrived life, preferring to break away from the norm that had been enforced on him. And this is why the film has resonated with so many people. It presents a character that embodies the new ethos of the era, a postmodern, pessimist view of the American dream. Truman rejects the old ways of thinking and he looks to the future, as scary and unfamiliar as that is. Weir artfully establishes his film as one that appeals to many people because of his relatable mindset, which adds to the overall significance of the text. We like Truman. He's pretty cool. So let's have another look at the themes. We've looked at simulated reality, honesty and dishonesty and fakery, the American dream or the utopia that's shattered, the impact of media on our lives, Truman's lack of freedom and choice, the commercialization or the commodification of his life, and then religion, that Christoph's very much a failed God. So really, Truman Show has a lot to offer. And that's all, folks.